How's it going, YouTube? Coming today with another video, and today, guys, what's brand new is my updated thoughts on Striker, all the new cards in my brand new list as well. I really do like the fact that we are getting new support, but it also doesn't mean that just because we got new cards that they're exactly what the archetype needed. And that's a really big thing that we see when we get new cards, is everyone hypes them up and they really want them to be good, but it doesn't really mean that they are. So these cards that we're going to be receiving, being H.A.M.P and linkage, are still going to be at least 2 formats away. So a lot of things can happen between now and then. Like, a lot of people want H.A.M.P right now because of Dragoon, but what if Dragoon gets addressed in the next 2 lists, right? Then it makes H.A.M.P a lot less good. It is a searchable kaiju, but at the same time, what do we really want into kaiju that we can't already just like main deck the crazy outs for, right? There's so many cards that you can play, especially in the going second list, where you can have like Lightning Storm, your Mind Control, Pinkertop, Afterburner. Like there's so many good cards that will just automatically do that matchup for you, right? So we're talking about a lot of the pros and the cons behind the new cards. I do want to take a moment and say thank you all so very much for the fact that we are so close to 8,000 subscribers. If you're not already subscribed, I'd recommend subscribing, because when we do hit 8,000, I'm giving away a Striker core that you can find over in my community tab. I am giving that away because I really want to make sure that somebody else can try out Striker that hasn't before. It's honestly my favorite deck of all time. It's so much fun. There's so much that goes into it. There's a lot of learning to be done with that deck too, even if you're a beginner, right? There's so much technical play that you can learn off of this deck, as long as you're playing with other people who can help you through and you really learn your plays. This deck can take you a very, very long way in the game. And I want to take a moment also and say thank you all so very much, because I would not have a channel or a community without you all. And I really appreciate this every single day, because I love making content, I love streaming, and I love making the videos, you know. It really does mean a lot to me, so thank you. The first thing that I want to hop into today, though, is I want to do a refresher course on what it really means to deck build with Striker. The number one important thing that I think about when I'm deck building Striker is the fact that this is a toolbox deck. This is the number one thing that you have to keep in the back of your mind when you are looking at brand new cards or when you're looking at a brand new build. So each card is an option. It doesn't really mean that you need to run every single Striker card, right? We have cards like Vector Blast and Scissors Cross. They're just not very good, right? There's an argument to have like Vector Blast to clear like the Samorg. I've heard a lot of arguments for that, but other than that, there's not really good usage out of those two. So then you have to look at cards like H.A.M.P and linkage. Like, okay, like what kind of options do they provide? So if you look at a card like Jamming Waves, the other thing I want to bring up about this is, if you recall back to my sideboarding video with Ray Dye, he had mentioned that you can sideboard one of copies of in-archetypal cards that can help you play against your opponent, especially if you're in a like going second position, right? So you can sideboard cards like Jamming Waves, you can sideboard cards like H.A.M.P, and they can always just be like one of copies because they're hyper searchable, right? So what's really cool about that too is that it gives you a lot of options on your side, and then you can kind of use those again as a toolbox. Like if you're playing against like PK with Scythe, right? You have the option to go into your Shark Cannon to banish the Scythe. You have Chalice in the deck. You have Widow Anchor. You have Imperm. These are all cards that are very available to you if you really need to be able to clear out a Scythe. The other thing too is that if you are dealing with like a DP, you have Afterburner to be able to clear that too, right? So there's a lot of very cool cards in the deck that just kind of allow you to play the game through multiple scenarios. And this is where I kind of look at linkage and the kaiju, and I'm like, okay, what scenarios do these really help me in? So today we're going to be talking about the pros and the cons of each of these cards, because I feel like they're really important to talk about when it comes to certain situations that you might be finding yourself in using them. So the first thing I'll hop into here is the pros. Now, one thing that I want to say real fast, I'm getting a lot of comments about this. You can use linkage if you already have a monster in your EMZ. I don't know where the discrepancy came into, but the card has to send something before it summons. So if you already have a monster in your EMZ, the only legal target to send would be the monster in your EMZ. There is no question behind if this card works, because there's no way that you just wouldn't be able to resolve it. Being able to send one from your EMZ and then summon a new one is exactly what the card's trying to do. If you have an open board, one of the pros here is that you do have the ability to like go Desires and then send Desires and summon one from your extra deck if you chain the linkage. But there's just not a world where you wouldn't be able to resolve this because you already have one in your EMZ. As long as you have nothing in your main monster zone, you're fine. The other thing is the fact that this is a fast OTK. I really do like that about the card. The downside to that is that it has to be against an open board, right? The open board thing really does kind of suck, but there's a lot of people who will just pass against Striker because they don't respect the fact that we're going to have linkage. I mean, even now, right? Like, you see a ton of people just passing against Striker because we don't have the ability to OTK. But that will change up very fast. Your opponent's going to have to do like something, because that's the one thing that really kills us, right? Is if our opponent does nothing, they just pass, we have no gas to work off of. There's no monsters to steal. There's no monster to pull from the graveyard. It's kind of unfortunate. But so if your opponent is forced to play the game because they know an OTK is coming, then it just makes our turn 2 that much better, in my opinion. The other thing, too, is the fact that this card dodges Imperm, which is always amazing. Being able to resolve your Kagari all the time, super, super nice. The cons of this. The lock alone is really unfortunate for this card because going second, this card is literally unplayable. If you're going against a really big board and you just need to get into your cards like access code, because especially if you're going second, you just get spell count. You have the extra card in your hand. You're probably playing things like Desires. There's a lot of cards you can trade out from your hand, like Chalice, Afterburner. There's a lot of really good opportunity to be able to hit your spell count and really be able to get the gas that you need to go into things like access code. Being locked into Sky Striker is super bad in this point because, yes, if you don't have Ray, then you can't play, but like if you're already going second, you should have those going second cards already in, and just cracking the board and being able to set up some kind of interruption for your opponent in the follow-up is still better, in my opinion, than having linkage here, and then just like hoping that you don't need to go into like your access code or whatnot. So for me, I feel like I would never want to see this card going second, especially because if you have Nibiru, like this card is insta-dead. It's just not something that I would really value. You'll see in my list too that I play more copies of Area Zero because I'm playing Nibiru and I want to make sure that I can clear the Nibiru as much as possible. I really just don't want to be in a situation where I open up like this and like no Ray and Nibiru, because I already know they have to choose between breaking their board with Nibiru or if I want to summon a monster from my extra deck on my turn and then also be locked at everything else, right? So I would prefer this just going first and just side it out if you're going second, because I don't really feel like it's that good otherwise. The other thing, though, is that you have to know that you can OTK. If you don't know if you can or not, this card is fairly bad, because if you run into an Imperm, then you're wasting your Kagari on trying to add back your linkage, where you just get hit with the Imperm, and then all of a sudden you just don't really have any of your rebuttal that you usually would, because then you're also wasting your Hayate on sending a monster, most likely, because you wouldn't have Ray or, like, you would need Ray and Rose, right? So you probably have one but not the other. So you waste your Hayate, you waste your Kagari trying to go for this, and it's a really tough go if they do end up stopping it. The fact that you can OTK with this card is probably the best thing about it, but I really do think with that lock that they're going to go for link 3 or 4, which is only the thing that makes sense to me, honestly, because if you're going to be locking us into Striker monsters, there's got to be something better that we can go into, right? So maybe we'll see that down the road if they are printing out support cards. I just really think that's a really cool possibility, and that's something I'm going to keep my fingers crossed for, right? So the next thing I want to bring up, though, is with the OTK, you don't just need Ray, right? You can do this if you start off with linkage and then you have Rose in hand. The reason being is because you can go linkage, go into Hayate, send Ray, go Kagari, add back linkage, summon your Shizuku, and then when you summon Shizuku, you can just summon the Rose from your hand, and that makes up for the 15 that you didn't start off with Ray on, which is really cool, and just another really good application from Rose. So this is the only time where I would consider playing the third Rose, because this just enables you to be able to kill that much faster if you open these two together. The other thing, too, is that shout out to Tbax9 from my comment section. He actually brought this up to me, and this is something that I kind of overlooked. But if you are going first, you can set your linkage, and then when your opponent goes over the 5-summon threshold, you can flip linkage and then chain link to Nibiru. Nibiru would wipe the board. You summon Nibiru to your side of the board. Then linkage would resolve, send Nibiru token, or like not the token, the monster, and then you can summon one from your EMZ, which is pretty cool, honestly. I think that's a really nice interaction. You can go ahead and summon that like your Shizuku if you're confident they can't do anything else, right? And then you can search engage with the end phase. Very, very nice thing to see here. I definitely did not think about that one, but that's pretty cool. The next thing to bring up here is going to be talking about H.A.M.P. So this card has a lot of problems, and one thing that I see is that you need an ace already, and that's usually one of the biggest problems for the deck already, right? No Ray, no play. That's just something that we can't really get around right now without having more copies of Ray. The fact that this is not an ace itself, that's a big problem. and the fact that it can be a brick too. So if you don't see an ace already and you're like, man, I can't really play the game without ace, so, you know, like I don't have a ray, I don't have a rose, I can't really do anything. And then you see H.A.M.P in your hand and you're like, wow, this card's super dead. That's something that I just have seen a lot in testing where I'm like, you know, I'm already having a problem getting the Ray Rose. I'd rather this should be like a consistency card or a card to help me break the board rather than needing to rely on the fact that like you need an ace monster on the board. So to me, I feel like H.A.M.P would be a solid sideboard if you are just going second. You just put in the 1 of copy, so you have that extra card to draw into. Otherwise, I don't really feel like it's that good to have in the deck currently. Again, because after the next 2 formats, maybe Dragoon gets addressed before we even get this, and then this card is kind of less relevant. It is a searchable kaiju, so that's where having a 1 of copy in your side really wouldn't be the worst thing. But that's just something that I want to bring up as a talking point here, is the fact that maybe we don't really need this one in particular, right? So my list here is going to be no H.A.M.P or no DPE. I don't really feel like they're that needed. I think DPE is really solid if you're going first. I also just have a really big issue with that card and seeing the bricks. The bricks really do hurt the deck, where if you see a handful of spells, I've always had this philosophy about Striker, is if you at least see a handful of spells, like maybe 1 monster, you can break just about any board that you're going up against. And that's true. If you see like your Afterburner, your Shark Cannon, right, you automatically deal with like the PK board, because you can force out the DPE if they don't already force itself, because a lot of people pop in the standby phase. They'll bring back the Scythe, and you can change Shark Cannon and then like banish the Scythe. You can go ahead and use the Afterburner to blow up like the Rusty if you're having a problem with like there being a break sword in the grave with the Fogblade, so you don't get something popped. There's many applications behind this, right? Which is why I really love the Striker cards. The other thing, too, that you might find a bit particular is that we have the 3 Dark Hole on the side. This is actually really funny, but this is honestly probably one of the biggest brain things that you can do. So a lot of people, when you're going second, right? Like my list is going second 100%. I'm trying to break a board. I'm trying to just run through my opponent as fast as possible. If you Lightning Storm them in game 1, if you have the opportunity to show them that you're playing Lightning Storm, right? They're going to start summoning things in defense, especially if you're playing against like Sword Soul, what have you, right? They're going to summon like their Baron in defense, and they're just going to keep trying to play around this. You take out your Storms, you put in your Dark Holes, and then when they put everything in defense, you just rip the Dark Hole, and if they like negate it with Baron, you like chain Chalice or Widow Anchor, and all of a sudden their whole board's cleared, and they try to play around it the best they could and played really minimally. And at that point, your linkage becomes insane. Because if you already have a way, like you're siding in more board breaks and you know that their board is not going to be full enough to like stop you from what you're doing, you can side in your Dark Holes, clear the board, and then linkage OTK. So I know this is kind of funny to see it because you're like, wow, Dark Hole unironically in 2021, right? Almost 2022. But it's really solid in this interaction. The other thing, too, is that around the time that we get our H.A.M.P and we get our linkage, we're probably going to get Dark because this comes in, I think, Battles of Chaos, which is just literally right around the corner. And this is going to be really impactful because especially in a format where DPE lives, you can go ahead and use the Dark to reborn DPEs, which is crazy. I did that the other day on stream as well. So that's something that's really important to note, is that we are getting other cards in the realm of just the linkage and the H.A.M.P, right? I play 2 copies of linkage. I'd probably just play 1, but I'm playing Desires, so if I banish 1, I still want to have it as an option in the deck, right? So I want to make sure that I am running at least 2. The fact that I am running these, though, I do run double Area 0 because I want to be able to clear my own Nibiru, but Nibiru is too good not to run, so there's no way that I'm not running 3 of it. It's just so good right now. It's so impactful. Even in the next format with the Brave tokens, you can trade 1-for-1 with the Griffin, or like 1-for-1 with a negate, right? It's super good. But anything else about the list is pretty standard as to what I'm already playing. I just don't personally really like H.A.M.P. I would probably sideboard a copy of H.A.M.P because, you know, it's really solid in certain situations. If you ever really need to add, out something, if you're playing against like Edignist or what have you, you know, you can always side it in and out it because it is searchable. And then no DPE because I just don't want to see any of the bricks in my hand. I want to play a low monster count. I am playing the 3rd Rose though, again, because that is something where if you see a Rose and linkage, you are able to kill, especially if you're adding in those Dark Holes. You know that you can clear the board. You're going to be able to run through your opponent pretty quick there. So I hope that you enjoyed this because this is the list that I think I'll be running with moving forward. I always say I think because Deck building is never a final product. There's always more that you can do, and after an event's over, your list is already outdated. You need to keep updating it. So there's always going to be new ideas and always going to be new interactions that we find. So for right now, this is what I'm running currently. And then again, if you do have the need to go ahead and find a lesson, you can go on my Metafy page. I have a bunch of different lessons already planned out. So if you want to find one that really fits for you, if one doesn't fit for you, you can feel free to PM me on Discord and really ask me questions about it, and we can make a personalized session for you. Another thing too is if you're not already part of my community, Discord, Twitch, Twitter, you go ahead and find those links in the description below. I hope that everyone has a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you all very much.